We're scientists. We want to evaluate them. We want to understand what their power is. I can see the tidal wave coming, and we can either have an amazing surfing ride or, get stuffed. I need to really understand what these things are really capable of and what I and our team's capable of. So we really try to use the suite of tools. We have this thing we call accelerated insights. What we used to do in about 7 weeks, because of doing a major study, we now do in about 7 days.
AI may replace many of our jobs, but UX research is one of the roles most at risk because the technology is increasingly automating many of the tasks. John Whalen is one of the researchers working at the forefront of leveraging AI. He joins us today to map out the future of research and how anyone in product can ride the AI augmentation wave to better individual and team results.
Maybe there will really be fewer UX researchers. Maybe they're more focused on this, I'm calling sort of storytelling or conducting. I picture someone in front of an orchestra and orchestrating these things. So I think you still need someone to be able to do that kind of thing. There's many questions in research, and I don't see any reason why a designer or a PM can't ask a set of questions that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise and get a quick answer.
This is episode 28, and we're discussing how AI will transform product research with John Whalen Ph.D. We cover topics that are hugely important to anyone working in product and agencies, including how to gain more influence with stakeholders and leaders, that it is possible to do 7 weeks of work in 7 days thanks to AI, that researchers must be curious about AI or get wiped out, that how we work has already been disrupted every time a new tool arrives, and why synthetic users are actually immensely powerful and when to use them.
I really want people to think obviously about the end users, but turn that just as much to your senior stakeholders. This is a, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars investment. If they get it right, they're the hero. If they don't, they kind of are out of a job. They're actually very vulnerable. And this is a way we can actually really help them have informed design.
John Whalen leads insights and innovation at Brilliant Experience, where he helps global brands understand the psychology behind their customers' behaviors and brings successful products to market. Initially skeptical about AI, John and his team conducted extensive AI versus human studies to pinpoint precisely where AI-enhanced research excels and where human judgment remains irreplaceable, and became convinced that AI will transform how research will be done. Now he regularly interviews pioneer founders in the AI for UX space and leverages the latest AI tools to deliver rapid, scaled, global insights for top brands. With a PhD from Johns Hopkins, John combines academic rigor with real-world pragmatism to help UX researchers and product leaders harness the new realities of AI-powered research. Follow him on LinkedIn and learn about his work at brilliantexperience.com. Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. We provide a pragmatic and practical deep dive into what AI can do and how it's transforming industries. We help designers, researchers, and product managers excel in a rapidly changing future. If you find this strategic content helpful, make sure to follow us in your favorite podcasting app. It also really helps us if you leave reviews. We're on a mission to collect examples of how you're using AI to elevate how you work. Share your examples at designof.ai. Welcome, John. So 5 years ago, you wrote a book called Design for How People Think, using cognitive science to build better products. You wrote that UX is much more multidimensional and multisensory than we'd all expect. Can you tell us a bit about the 6 minds of UX concept from your book and how we should be applying it?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I think you all know implicitly, but we have to remind ourselves is user experience isn't on a screen, it's in the mind. I saw a long time ago how our experiences could be so much better if we really thought about the psychology of it. So the 6 minds is to get you thinking about all the dimensions of this. So there's things that you might not have thought of first, like wayfinding. How do we find our way around, especially in a virtual or digital world? What's really drawing their attention? What's their Where's Waldo of what they're trying to find? What's their frame of reference? When we talk about happy hour, you could imagine a very fancy place with neon lights and so on, or a bar with honky tonk and a beer. So what's their representation of what they're expecting and the way they think something is going to work? What's the language they're using? So are they talking about, oh yeah, there's a clunk in the back, or I think that the second bolt from the catalytic converter has a problem. So that means they might know a little more about cars. What are they really trying to decide, and what really matters to the most, and what emotions are wrapped up in this, even if it's a B2B product. So I think all of those together were a subset, of course, of the sophistication of our minds, but very different processes that all together produce an experience.
Great. And can you share a specific story of how you've applied these principles to help a client really understand and get a frame of reference for how to apply these principles?
And I'm going to go back just a little ways, but because it's relevant to today. So there was a project we had in about 2017 that was for a group called Videology. It's been since acquired, but they had one of the very first AI tools. In this case, it was for ad buyers. So you had to buy, various video ads for, say, GE, and you'd think that that was a very mundane process, and they had machine learning to optimize it. So it all made sense. Well, it turns out that was a hugely more complicated, and the reason I came in was because folks were so used to. I have an analogy. If you think of a outdoor motor on a little fishing boat, you've got to like squeeze the gas, then you open the choke, then you got to pull the thing, and then you probably have to bang it on the side because it's old, and then try again. Anyway, what we were giving them was an auto button, just like on a modern car now, where you don't have to turn the key. And people were so used to all the ways they had to finagle to get great ad buys and move the levers, and they felt like that was really their role. And when we gave them just, what is your target? Okay, I'll do it for you. They had a sort of heart attack, and they were like, you're going to steal my job. You're going to, what am I going to do? What's my role here? And so it was so emotional, even though it was about ad buying in an ad agency or in a major corporation. And so we really had to learn, what was their decision making process? What were they expecting to find? What was the language they were using? And we actually built back in some tools so they had more levers and felt like they had more agency. And so it was such an interesting case where actually it was probably optimal when they didn't touch it. And really their goal was to be strategic. And they didn't see that they were being just as strategic on this sort of high level way as they were like negotiating with each group and getting just the right ad buys. It was a lot like today, in that we're about to have these things do so much for us. And when do we want agency and when don't we? So I thought that was relevant to this. So yeah, we really had to think about, what was the language? What decisions were they making? What were their emotions? How did they think the experience should work? What were they paying attention to? So really those six minds kind of played a role.
It's such a powerful story because right now, every month, there's so many new products coming out. And functionally, under the hood, they almost do the exact same thing, but the look and feel of each of them is very distinct in many respects. And it makes me wonder if design is going to change in a big, meaningful way. You're ultimately someone who loves to understand the brain. And there's
Mhm.
a lot of speculation that AI will change the way that we have to design, rely on, and interact with technology. Have you seen any signals in your work that our behaviors are already starting to change or will be changing soon?
Yeah, I think the best answer is we don't have very much data yet, but I can tell you what my intuitions, what I'm seeing is, like you were saying, signals are. First of all, with designing, we want answers, or we want to get what we want done. And so, one of our big clients for a long time, and it's on our website, is and was Google. And you can see the contrast with what, say, modern Google searches or Perplexity, where it skips over, here's a great website to find your answer, and says, here's what you should be thinking about. And so it leaps us to an answer. So the question is, how do we take that in? And so there is design about, how should I trust that? When do I want to dive in? When do I want to learn more? There's really two ways you can think about this. One is, I want something done sort of automatically. Like, I love when I walk into Starbucks and my cup is just waiting for me there, just the way I want it. And other times I really want control. And where in one case you've got very distinct things, you go do this for me, I'll be over here. In the other case, I really want to sort of co-think. And I think, to your point about what's changing about design, is this notion of co-thinking. And so I'd like to think that my book, Design for How People Think, if we think design AI for how people think, is really relevant. How do I want you to represent the information to be natural to me? Which parts do I want to make a decision on, and which parts do I want you to handle because I have limited working memory? What are the words I use for this in comparison to someone else? So, like, real personalization could be a real difference there. It just opens up so many new fields, and you are going more into how people are thinking than just where should people click.
You bring up a key point here, which is you use the word personalization. And I feel like personalization has been really co opted by the marketing field to be about how we
Right.
talk to you. But it feels like now, because design is being taken over by these automated tools, it actually is the look and feel and interaction model that we serve to you. Like you said, these levers. Because when we think
Mhm.
of a car, the way a car is designed today, it doesn't need all those buttons, really. It could just be a
Right.
start button and it's probably good to go, but it'd be very uncomfortable and unsettling for us to sit in that type of car today, at least. What are some of your predictions, at least in terms of the types of websites and the types of digital tools that we're going to start seeing popping up as a direct result of this level of personalization?
So I don't mean to go too nerdy into it, but there's this notion of multi-agent systems, and these are where there are lots of steps can be handled, and a lot of things could be sort of orchestrated for you. So I think we'll much more be a manager of many. Think of yourself as the boss of many little agents that are out there. And so I think one question is how much are we designing for the humans interacting with our tools, and how much are we letting their agents actually interact with our tools, and what do they need to give us the information we need? And so that's a whole new world of is that HTML? Is it behind it? Technologically, we'll figure out an answer. But I think there are lots of times, and the example I gave of just looking something up in Perplexity and getting the answer is a good example where I'm not looking at that website or that tool or that app. I'm simply getting an answer. And so I think that drawing from all those sources could be really interesting. And I do a class on this kind of stuff, and we give an example of parents who are traveling with small children in a new country they've never been to before. And they describe the need for something that says, okay, I want to, which museums, for example, or kids' things do I want to go to? And then, well, that I have a 2-year-old, so I can only make it this far distance to, say, public transport or to a car. And also, they're going to want to go to the bathroom and they're going to want this kind of food. How can something reach out and give me all these things that I want kind of in a singular experience because I just want to know all those things and I have to find them all independently right now. It's very clunky. So logically, we could have many agents that are going after all these different elements and bringing it together for us and repackaging in really interesting new ways.
Right. And when we think about how clunky these ecosystems of different agents can be, it's a really interesting behavioral challenge as I see it, because we're really just at the beginning of this kind of agent ecosystem play. I've been working on a project recently that was really looking at the future of interactions with AI, and that was really the central part of that conversation was if you consider in the future we will have these multi-agent systems and people will want to have a single one that represents them, that can be trained on them and speak on their behalf. And so how will that change people's engagement or interactions with AI in this space? And I'd love to know from you, as someone who is thinking about this a lot clearly, is what do you see as some changes in consumer behavior that we might need to plan for, to research on, to strategize around when we're building out for the potential world of multi agent systems?
Yeah, gosh, first of all, who knows, really? But I'll do my best. I think that one of the pieces there is just that sort of solving my problems collectively. We in user experience are really trying to wave the flag for the end human, right? And I think one of the exciting things here is we can really have something on our end that is really supporting our needs. So I think that there will be these tools or things that essentially are the consumer, I've got you on my side kind of perspective. And right now we have to sift through maybe a marketing message or deciding which product to pick based on things that they tell us. And the interesting thing is perhaps there's something that's going to give us a window into, well, let me dive through all those good and bad comments about the product or service. Let me go into, you're this kind of person, so let me try to imagine here are the kind of needs or things that are most relevant to you. So I think that notion of thinking like me and giving me back something that really resonates with me is really interesting. And we're seeing that maybe in a slightly more creepy way with things like character AI, but where we're really want something more human in response. We did a study, just one last example. We have a study a long time ago with when things like Alexa first came out, and we had Alexa and the Google product and some of the others. It turns out actually that the Google product was the best at answering questions, just getting them right. We did sort of like a Jeopardy. Tell us which country has the Eiffel Tower. The moral of the story is that half the people said they wanted the Google product because it answered the questions correctly the most. Half of the people said they wanted Alexa, and the reason why was not because it did the most right, but it answered them the way they asked the question. It felt more humanistic to them. They were willing to have grace on perfection because of that. And so I think that that's a piece to experience that we shouldn't undervalue now that things are feeling more detached, even with COVID and everything else.
What a great example. So, going back then to trying to research and understand these experiences and the ways in which people want to be engaging with AI technology, one of the things that we're constantly being told about AI tools is this idea that we can just do more faster. And I think, especially as someone who works in the research field, where we're seeing it constantly being commoditized and undervalued with the idea of just do it faster, that anybody can do research now. And so I'd really like for us to take a moment to talk about not just doing things faster, but how can we be doing it better through the use of these tools? How can we be making smarter insights with these shorter timelines?
Sure. No, such a thoughtful question. So, like I said, in teaching my class, I think one of the things that really came out from our team was, wow, I can do research really fast. But, I'm so used to actually interviewing the people myself and really feeling them and really I can wave the flag for them and support their interests because I've internalized what they're feeling and struggling with. And so some of these AI tools, I think they actually can make you go faster, but they aren't necessarily well suited to either the major decision maker or designer or whomever to really, really experience what that person is experiencing. I think they have an opportunity actually in design of those tools to make them so much better in that way. Functionally, they're faster. So, first of all, I think the notion of doing research faster, we actually looked at us just doing things the old way from way back in 2022 and also doing things with AI, to accelerate what we're doing or augment. And the other thing that I've done that I don't know if you know is I've actually interviewed a bunch of founders of these products, and so I think we're at about getting close to 30 now. Just because I was terrified of missing what opportunities I might have, or even understanding should I take these things seriously or not? What role should they play? What role should I play? And so what we've come down to is yes, having these tools actually in virtually every step make things a little faster, get us the first 40% of the way there. The way that we've structured the way we work with clients now is to turn things around quickly, but all of our time virtually for our UX researchers is spent in the insights part. Certainly, we are working with stakeholders to define questions properly. We're experimental psychologists. We'd like to think how to set up a test. But I think that really the goal there is us going back and doing that old school diving into the research. And actually, some of the AI tools help us to go straight to this is what the AI tool believes is an insight. Great. Let's look at those source things that created that. And let's try to dive in and see, oh, it actually missed this other subtlety. They're great at saying, here's the average response, here's an interesting insight, but not framed as much yet. And I'm sure they can in the future strategically. So here's what we're setting out to do. Here's what we're setting out to innovate. Here's our corporate landscape. Here's our goals. All those things are not coloring the way it's focusing. And so we still need humans not only to find out about the humans, but secondarily to give it that lens. And so I think that can change over time, but that and humanity are probably the two big things I give the tool makers to come back to us with.
Please make sure to subscribe to our Substack to never miss an episode. On the Design of AI Substack, you'll also receive more strategic insights and recommended products at designofai.substack.com.
You mentioned your podcast. For everyone, it's called AI for UX. And you've spoken to a lot of founders, and they're tools that are really exciting. There's so many of these new tools coming out. But I think what's really important for people to know is that you've become quite a champion for AI's ability to fundamentally change how we do UX research. Can you walk us through what a typical project looks like today versus, let's say, what it might have looked like 2 years ago?
And to be clear too, you mentioned me as a champion, and I wanna say that I think I'm seeing the opportunity here. Also, those of you that know me from before definitely was so skeptical of these tools and really, we're scientists. We want to evaluate them. We wanna understand what their power is. And so, yes, I think I am a champion in the sense that I can see the tidal wave coming and we can either have an amazing surfing ride or, get stuffed. I need to really understand what these things are really capable of and what I and our team's capable of. So we really try to use the suite of tools. We have this thing we call accelerated insights. What we used to do in about 7 weeks, because of doing a major study, we now do in about 7 days. And it's really remarkable that we've compressed the time. And we've certainly done things where we've compared the quality of those things and really looking at each piece sort of carefully. But one thing we're doing differently is and this might be a point of discussion already, is on our first meeting with stakeholders, we try to bring them all in the same virtual room and get them to actually work with synthetic users. So we try to say, what really are your research goals? And like, great, who generally are we talking about that you might want to learn from? Let's go ahead and ask this synthetic user a question. And so I'm just trying to give you an example of what's different. And that is not to get the answer and we're all done. That's to stimulate our stakeholders to be like, oh, that's not really what I was looking for. I was looking for this. So we're helping actually between us and through this tool to deeply understand what really the stakeholders want. The other thing is maybe their definition of who they'd like us to talk to wasn't quite right at first. So this helps us sort of align on core stakeholder goals and on the target audiences. From there, we often use some prompting we do. So it is sort of old school prompting with whatever tool you might use to help us go faster in designing the study, to help us go faster in crafting, say, an interview guide or a recruiting guide. And then there are amazing AI tools that allow us to match us with users. And also, what we've found is that the biggest change in our process is that we're using more of AI moderation. And this is where the participant logs in and they are basically asked questions by the AI and asked follow up questions by the AI. And I know that sounds very qualitative. And for the folks that are maybe more quant driven, the interesting thing here is it opens up so many things. That opens up speed, so we can do 200 people overnight. Scale, we can do things. So, the engineers at Google, a really good example. They're like, wow, those 8 interviews are really interesting, but, we have hundreds of millions of users. Like, so what? And so with this, we can scale to a point that might be needed. The other thing is that it allows you to do this notion of qualitative and quantitative has kind of changed where you can really do open-ended questioning at scale and have a process to be able to take that in and adjust it. So there is this blending of those two, people say, I'm a qual researcher, I'm a quant researcher. That really is kind of, I think in the long run will be sort of blended. And the other thing is we can be more inclusive internationally. My key point is that we used to be asked, can you please ask, 16 people about this core question on our product? And now what we can do is we can ask that question, but internationally, multilingually, and have the answer much faster for them and allow them to get more insight. So I think that the pieces that have changed for us are just simply speeding some processes, doing AI moderation, and giving us actually more time to really dig into the insights part. So we still have humans do a lot of time on that. And then framing the report, I haven't found anything good at AI that tells a story like humans do yet, especially for knowing the stakeholders. Here's how we need to present the story in a way that's persuasive because our clients are just as much the users as they are the end stakeholders because we really want to make a difference. But hopefully that gives you a feel for it really has dramatically changed, primarily because of this notion of AI moderation, really.
I want to talk about AI moderation for a second. I think when we're speaking to a single research goal or a very small set of questions, it makes a lot of sense. So I find that there is a ton of value in it, especially around scalability, the access to a multilingual, multinational audience that maybe would have been prohibitive otherwise. But when we're talking about a larger study, something that's maybe more ambiguous, and is longer than perhaps 5 minutes. How are you ensuring the fidelity of the insights and the results that you're getting? Because the challenge that I've had with these tools is that when you are asking a very strict set of questions, it's easy. But the more that you need to go into follow ups or digging into responses that you're getting, the less consistency that you'll get in those responses. So you might have 200, 300 responses that all have a different set of questions that were asked to them, and just a lot less consistency in that way. Is there anything that you've found in your experience that has worked to overcome that?
So, first of all, you're absolutely right that this is a great example of this. What do I want to be in control of, and what do I want the AI to handle for me? And for you, this feels, kind of too out of control. And you would love to have more of those levers to pull to rein this thing in. So, there actually are a range of tools, and some of them allow you to say, ask no more than this many follow on questions. With this follow on question, here are the kinds of range of things that I'm interested in knowing. And we found that actually the prompting beforehand to warn them of what's to come has been helpful for us too. So to put it, frankly, we put it to the test where we said, here's humans doing moderation for a body of work. Here's AI doing moderation for a body of work. What are we finding as the core insights? And they were so similar. And I mean, I think I do something with special sauce that as a human, I can outperform. And there are definitely use cases where absolutely I don't want to use this at all. And I think you're right that this is a nice subset where there's a specific question being asked, it's fairly well framed. We're not talking about a whole process. We're not talking about just in generally how do you live. It's sort of narrow in focus. That's really its sweet spot. I think you're right. And also, when we do our class and other things, when you test it yourself, you know that hey, I answered the question that follows on. So can you answer the question again? And you're like, what? And so I agree that that is imperfect and flawed, and it's not as elegant as a human might do. I guess the way that we try to work with this is first of all, we always are doing a sample ourselves. So the humans talking to humans. There's no doubt that we do a subset like that. Chinese isn't my forte, so I might not interview those people in specific, but we try to get someone who can. And so, first of all, yes, always have a subsample of humans to humans. The other thing is that this can be much more iterative. Suppose we could do 200 interviews. Why not do 40 and a subset and then say, oh, there are these interesting things that popped up. Maybe I as a human will interview to really learn more about those, and then let's do this follow on. So it almost becomes sort of 5 micro studies rather than one giant one. So I think that that's one piece, is just making it manageable from that perspective. The other is learning how to be really good at pulling data out of these AI analysis tools, which we can talk about too, which are they're not perfect and humans can outperform. So how can they augment our performance as opposed to anything else? I think that it's easy, really easy with some of these tools to over rely on them. One of them, for example, I'm wondering, does a wonderful job of saying, here's the question that I want to ask. Here's the kind of people I want you to talk to, and it develops a plan and it has a way of doing recruiting itself. You can basically say hit go, and then suddenly you get answers. And so if you were unquestioning with that, that could be bad. There is a real danger for our non-researcher friends, so our PMs or our designers. I think there are awesome ways that you can get insights you wouldn't have before, but I am training everyone in my classes to go in and look at the actual video of what, there was this, it claimed there's this point. Let's go watch subset of those videos and understand, was it on the mark or not? And for that matter, you're just experiencing the raw data yourself. And that's really important too.
I'd say that compared to Brittany, I'm a little more neutral in terms of whether AI is good for research. And a
Hmm.
big part of it is when your students actually posted a study for Wondering, and I participated in it, and the tool is actually
Oh,
wonderful.
cool. Hmm.
And the thing that it started raising in my mind is I think that we are a little over nostalgic on how research is done. And we assume that doing it the classic way is the best way. But we keep forgetting situations like this. You gave the example of speaking to synthetic users as a way to pressure test a study. That's no
Hmm.
different than going out and recruiting someone on the street, bringing out into a boardroom and drilling them with questions. You don't know the quality of that participant. You don't know how reliable they are. You don't know how biased they are. It's the exact same problem as a synthetic user. Equally so, if we're a large multinational, we'd probably be working with some recruiting company where you don't know the quality of their list, who then might be working with a research vendor on the ground, where again, the quality of their answers is inconsistent, or the questions being asked are inconsistent. So, to me, in many respects, AI is only amplifying the quality and the diligence of the study and the people using those tools. And if those people don't have core principles of their own, the AI will only enhance whatever those are. So
Yeah.
I'm neutral, and I think that's where I have to sit on it
Mm.
because thus far I have not seen AI deliver the value beyond scale yet. But every time I look at one of these tools, I'm blown away. So it leads me to my next question here, which is which are the AI products that you feel are the most game changing right now?
We've studied tools for study design, tools for, I think, really this combination of being able to do reasonably high fidelity recruiting in multiple countries in combination with having AI moderation. Just to give you a sense, like, why is that a big deal? Well, there are two things. One is you don't rely on when I sleep and I don't. The people no longer need to be scheduled in the scheduling and rescheduling, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to rely on them being in speaking a particular language. And so I think we can be so much more inclusive in it. The other thing that I see very pragmatically, and I love doing great high fidelity research studies. I mean, I got a PhD. I love that stuff. But I think that pragmatically, there's so many times that PMs or major stakeholders have made a call and just not had really good data to make informed decisions. Well, let's give them something rather than nothing. And so I think that there are really opportunities. And just this notion of inclusion, even geographically, I think is important too. So recently we had a thing where how do people think about living with their pets and treating them and so on? And what's different between China and France and the US, for example? And we turned that around in like a week. And we never would have done that study 3 years ago because it would have been so expensive. It would have taken so long. And so these stakeholders got something they never would have gotten before. And we can debate like the level of fidelity, but they had zero versus something. And so I do think that's notable. Many people in my class and as I speak to, and even people who really get upset when they talk about, hey, you're part of the problem, getting this to be, you know, the AI taking over our jobs. I think it's coming whether I talk about it or not. But also I think it's fair to have this open question of what can they do that matches me or better and what can't they? And let's just be thoughtful in our careful questioning and not just taking it at face value and move forward. There are a lot of folks that are like, well, it's not like me doing the testing. Historically, we would go and meet people face to face, and suddenly we felt like in the old school, I'll date myself, WebEx was, oh, you can do an interview over WebEx? Of course you can't. You can't feel them, you can't see their shoulders, being nervous and everything else. We're coming to a place where we're learning to accept a new way of working, and it's hard for all of us to adapt.
As every new research technology came out, it was criticized and considered a poorer form of the craft than the previous one.
Right. So think of insights folks. Many of them are like, you will not take away this Qualtrics from my hands, no matter how hard you try. It lives and breathes with me. And I'm sure there were folks that were like, if we don't mail them a survey and get it mailed back, it's not the same. And so someone doing something on their phone, well, how could that be the same? Having people do a video diary. Well, we're not there to videography. So I, I think you're absolutely right. And that was kind of the point I was trying to drive to.
Okay, so let's circle back. What are some of the tools that you recommend
Mm.
people explore? Because there are so many. You mentioned Wondering, and when I saw it, I was, wow. I told Brittany immediately, this is going to change intro baseline research because it is so effective at getting you easy, quick insights. Not deep insights, but easy,
Yeah.
quick insights.
I just want to say one thing though, is I do think that tools like Wondering are amazing, but they really do underpin the need to know what you're doing because they
Mhm.
represent themselves as though it's so easy for anyone to do. Put in a prompt, we'll build the whole survey, the whole study for you. But it doesn't work that way. It's like it creates this study for you that no human would know how to answer these things, right? There still is this massive underpinning of needing to have a properly planned approach to how to use those. And I would say almost we need to have a new way of thinking about how to use those tools.
And I'm certainly not disagreeing with you, Brittany, but keep in mind, think about going from ChatGPT 3.5 that we first kind of were all introduced to really a year later, what was available. So I'm not necessarily saying all these tools are perfect right now, but just remember they're all at the worst they'll ever be. And so we need to kind of future forecast and imagine what they could be. And I think that's really where my head is. So I'm Canadian, so I'll talk about where is the puck going to go as opposed to skating to the puck. I think that's really where my head is at. What might these things be capable of? And I try hard, RP, not to necessarily name specific products, but you can see as I've talked about them and the folks that I've interviewed, we do actually really try to be really neutral at Brilliant and say, here are these possibilities. And I am in Washington, D.C., so I'll say it depends. Because let me just give you a couple categories of these things. So one is the ones that are really good at sort of individual studies. And I think and we can kind of like rattle off a whole list. So there's Listen Labs and Wondering and Outset and Herd. And anyway, there are many others. And then if we wanted to do a diary study, I'd say DScout and others. And then there's another class of tools that are really focused on building a huge research repository. And I think that's another thing that will really transform how we do work, because historically it's so much that we've done research. We have a deck, we have these recordings, we have a hard drive, and they kind of just sit there, and we do another study and another study. So there's many of these, and I apologize for not bringing up everyone to memory that I interviewed, but there are folks like Marvin is a good example of this. There are Condens. There are many of these that sort of seek to do user evaluation, and I can kind of keep going. There's so many names, and I've actually in some of my talks I say here's a map, but the moral of the story is there are really good ones at driving collecting the data. There's some that are really masterful at bringing the data together in interesting ways. And I've got sort of a third class for you that are even maybe more, they have a different focus, I guess, more like a CX focus, where there are ones like Next and Olvi, and these are all names you might not have heard of, Yabble and Verve, and they seek to bring together social listening, things from your sales team, things from customer support, all these tests, and how can we use that fire hose to really drive insights? And so I do think there are all these interesting ways we're going to merge. And so one of the ways is the folks that historically have done innovation and product innovation, and there are folks who've done sort of insights in major corporations. And I really do think those will get closer together, really, because we and our stakeholders want to have access to all the same data.
You're highlighting something so critical for everyone listening to know, which is you need to become product agnostic because it's changing so quickly. And if you grasp onto your Qualtrics, as was a great example from 8, 10 years ago, you will get left behind. Because quite honestly, every quarter, there's a whole new round of products and you have to move
Mhm.
quickly. You need to adapt. You need to imagine there's a new way of doing things. And if you don't, you might be left using an old model, perhaps, which might get you just poor results, right?
Right. And so actually, we can talk about both how all of us in product or experience have to change. By the way, in the interviews with founders, if you're interested in some of those videos, there are sort of three things we do. One is to just say, who is the ideal market for your product? Show me how it works. And then the third thing is, where do you think this all is going? Like, you have to build a product anticipating where things are headed. So tell us about your vision of where this is headed. And those are really interesting conversations. So as I've interviewed folks, and they're so thoughtful and insightful, it feels like folks like me that are really the researcher side, we call ourselves researchers because we're doing the research, we're doing the interviews. And I really do think we'll be more conductors, of the symphony of all these tools. And so we're really going to be making curators. We're going to make sure we're doing, like, Brittany, I can feel from here how strongly you feel about doing great, high quality research. I'm with you. And so that's one of our roles there at scale. I think we'll have more time or more focus on storytelling and helping to be strategic. I know some folks felt like research was just, for this part of the product. I think to me, it's always been strategic, but even more so that we're informing things higher and higher up the food chain to let them know where the puck is headed, how people in general are evolving. And this is a great example of things like Perplexity or other things. What's the next tool? We're all into ChatGPT now. What's next? So how is that evolution happening? And so we're going to be the storytellers about that. And to do that across the world, we're going to need some of these tools to be able to scale and go fast enough.
We've mentioned a couple times around this conversation around the idea of these tools being viewed as devaluing research or devaluing the work of the researcher. And you touched a little on your perspective around that. And I'd love to hear more specifically, what is your perspective? And what are some examples of research work that you've found are different now because of these tools that maybe weren't possible before?
Yeah, certainly. I think the ones that come to mind, for example, it's very common for our clients to call us up and ask us for two kinds of things. One is, I need to do something at a scale I'm not capable of right now, and you can. And we're in a funny place too, where they might not be allowed to bring the tools in house yet because of legal or procurement or other reasons. Those are fair questions, and it's good to be cautious. And of course, in an environment like banking or healthcare or other things, we need to take care and we need to be cautious. But regardless, actually, folks know that we can do things sort of more internationally now and also just get them to things faster. Also, sort of this notion of a blend of qualitative and quantitative. So we're doing some survey questions and some things that are open ended so that really all the insights team and the innovation teams are getting things they need. So that's one side of how we're working differently and sort of quicker turnaround, really, just because we're driving efficiency, but we're still doing the insights. We're really digging in. I think the other piece is folks are saying something to the effect of, I have these 500 hours of interviews. Like, what did I leave on the cutting room floor? And, did they ever mention our brand, our marketing stuff during these interviews? Did they ever mention a product that they weren't thinking of? What did I just miss? And so we're doing a lot of looking back, and sometimes we're constrained. By the way, there are these very specialized tools. In other cases, they are in a controlled environment, so we're only allowed to use, say, Copilot, because that's the thing that's approved in their world. And so there are ways to use the brains behind any of these are typically, not always, but almost always LLMs. There are interesting deviations from that of people doing classic machine learning. But anyway, so I think those are the two pieces. One is really getting information fast and at scale, and that can be very exploratory as well. It doesn't just have to be, does this product fly? These things are very good at doing things like quick concept testing. That's great. But we still are doing more strategic work. The other piece is just, I have this big pile of data. What did I miss? And so really reanalyzing this, because we can do that kind of scale and have it help us to identify interesting pieces. And we also just on our own randomly look at videos in the entirety to see what the AI missed, so we know what to look for that it missed.
Looking back and seeing what was missed or mining for new insights, I think is an interesting point that I don't often hear people talking about when it comes to using these tools. So thank you for that. I also wonder, and I'm guessing that a lot of people who are listening to this would also be wondering, do you have any guidelines or sort of pillars within your team about when you believe it is appropriate to leverage AI and when you recommend not using AI?
Let me give you a great example where it's terrible. So, when we're trying to deeply understand a complex process, so when folks were building the 3D models for a new Caterpillar big dump truck, for example, and they had to do CAD tools, and there was the engineers, and there was the materials science people, and so on. We need to know the culture there. We need to know how many people are working together. We need to understand at this point, there's this decision. At this point, there's this decision. That's not something I can get the AI to do. I have to be there and understand the culture. And we worked with, it was such a fun study. We did things with pet parents. And so I had to be there and say, literally, where do they keep their cat treats? How do they actually feed the dog? Do they actually use the scoop that came with the stuff? Have they ever read the label? Do they even know where the label is? And so witnessing people was actually really valuable in both of these cases. No AI that does that for us. So, first of all, I think in that very investigative, learning about a new world or learning about maybe a whole new group that could be a potential for client for our products or services, that sort of really exploratory. I would say it's not a good use case in general. We also tread lightly on, like you said, when tools provide us, here's what you should ask, or here's what you should do. That's a great first start, but then you take out your red pen and make it better. So I think that we generally would encourage people to, first of all, always trust but verify, just like I think your intuition is, Brittany. And secondly, where I actually think that another thing that you might not have thought of for using this is that sort of bouncing ideas off of. So keep in mind, let's go back to synthetic users just for a moment. That can be useful not only for a representation of the end audience, where it's simply expanding your thought. I hadn't thought from that perspective. That could be a perspective I should investigate with my users. And I've saved, you know, interviewing a user to figure that out. And I can maybe get a little further faster. But the other side is there's a great book called, sort of I don't have the title perfect, but the sort of user researcher team of one. And it's a really popular. And for those kind of folks, having another virtual researcher they can bounce ideas off of or say, what do you think you found? Or what else would you have me explore? That sort of, or for that matter, imagine yourself as a brand strategy expert. What are you seeing in this data? Imagine yourself as a process optimization expert. That's not me. What are you seeing from this? And those things just might inspire further investigation. If that's not taking it at face value, that's expanding your thought pattern to be more inclusive to all the things you should drive value with. So, anyway, I think as a thought partner, it's an interesting one.
What you're describing in a lot of ways is not necessarily research. We're talking about insights and strategy in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires us to zoom out a bit and think about product orgs and the entire org as a whole. AI seems like it's going to radically shift what those roles and responsibilities are going to do. It's going to probably hybridize some of the roles. More people are going to be capable of getting the insights necessary to avoid bottlenecks. I'd really love to know, how do you believe orgs should evolve, and how do you believe they should be trying to leverage AI, better understand the psychology of users as a whole?
Yeah. Wow, what a were I to know the answer to that, right? That's awesome. So, but I'll do my best shot at least giving you food for thought. Now that we know we can do things faster, we can do things at scale, we can do more iteration and concept testing faster, we can look at scaled data, it actually suggests, at least in, and I promise to come back to precisely your question, but I want you to rethink even the notion of research, that we might really be curators of constantly evolving of collection of knowledge rather than being one-off kind of studies. And as a result, that means that maybe the product people have more access to, or really anyone has access to all these insights that they're seeking. They might still need a specialist to say, what does this really mean? Dive into this more, get me more insights, get me more subtlety to help me understand the segmentation here in the way people are thinking or working. When I ask my AI these kind of things too, so I really encourage people to do, they call it meta prompting, where you say, I want you to help me build a prompt to solve this problem for me or answer this question for me. So I'd love you, RP, to essentially do that for your question and see what it comes up with and then run that prompt to see what it gets. When we did this in our class together, we found that it predicted, and this is an AI and it doesn't know, it's not conscious, but maybe there really will be fewer UX researchers. Maybe they're more focused on this, I'm calling sort of storytelling or conducting. I picture someone in front of an orchestra and orchestrating these things. So I think you still need someone to be able to do that kind of thing. There's many questions in research, and I don't see any reason why a designer or a PM can't ask a set of questions that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise and get a quick answer. Let me go back to these controlled environments like healthcare. Some folks are like, oh yes, I'm only allowed to use Copilot. Well, is that all they use? Never. They're always using other things just outside of the controlled environment like they're supposed to. I think in the same way, our PMs and other folks are just going to use these tools, whether Brittany and I will lose sleep about it or not. In that world, what are the best roles? And it's really interesting that having folks come together from a sort of anthropological or humanistic perspective, from a what are we capable of building perspective, and what really is our strategic spot in this industry to build an experience? What would be valuable to consumers or our end target audience? Historically, there was a notion of here's an engineer, here's a designer, here's maybe a researcher, and here's a PM, and go. Historically, researchers are very happy in some respects to be the gatekeeper and have you like, oh, hold on, I'll tell you the answer. Let me go back to my magic sauce over here. That's just not going to be true anymore. So,
It's sometimes fun to speculate about the future. And one of the places my mind goes, and I hinted at this earlier, that we're going to be tool agnostic, which means we won't have those big
mm,
repositories that we used to. And in the grand scheme of things, we're the ones that created the semantics of how a product would get used, and a researcher would create an ontology of how information was processed. But the more control we give over these tools and platforms, we might lose track of the longitudinal knowledge building and knowledge keeping in many respects. So it'll be interesting to
mm,
see, both in a dystopian way where every study is going to happen distinct and forgetting what happened before, versus ones where researchers move into knowledge keeping and knowledge building capacities, where an organization, let's take a big one, let's take a ServiceNow or Atlassian, where they have these
mm,
knowledge keepers and they can keep referring back, and they have synthetic profiles of that knowledge, and they have personas built as PRDs. There's a level of sophistication that research and data can go to now with these tools that will far surpass anything we could ever imagine today. And that to me is amazing. But on the complete opposite end, we could lose sight of everything we've ever learned as an organization. And when we look back the last 3 years, the number of layoffs, there's so much knowledge that just went
sure.
entropy up into the sky. And it's kind of scary both directions in many respects, but there'll be researchers like you and Brittany who will see this new path forward, and there'll be product managers who see this new path forward. And it'll be fascinating to see what the future holds in many respects.
I mean, I think the hardest are the folks that are like, the gold for me and what really drives me in the morning as a researcher is to go and individually interview people. And that's the thing I love more than anything. Those people, I'm sorry, I love it too. And I remember I can tell you stories about someone I interviewed in 2013 because they really meant something to me and I really felt for them. But we'll be doing less of that. And we'll do a little more co doing this. I think that our PMs and our designers and everyone else on our team, whoever they might be, will really experience this more with us as well. Lastly, RP, you mentioned this notion of a synthetic representation of your audience. And one of the things that we can do today that you just couldn't do a year ago is so Verve. I'm sorry, there's so many tools with unusual names. This is Video Survey, Verve. They are one of the real champions, along with Yabble, which always makes me think of Flintstones, but that's okay. Verve allows you to have agents and have them either do things in sequence. So imagine people who are insights experts, branding experts, so on, and do a path. So it could do that. But you can also have it where you represent, say, you've got 20 major segments for your Pepsi Cola product, and you want to know what all of them are thinking about this concept you've got. Literally, I've been driving in my car talking to a representative user, synthetic user, and it's just been interesting to hear that other perspective. And I'm not saying that actually embodies perfectly what the real humans are, but it allows me to do things in such an interesting way. Also, with synthetic users, we can ask them very strange and inappropriate questions in a normal interview, right? We can ask them, tell me all of the steps required to do this in a jobs to be done format, step by step, and it'll just kind of spout it out. You can ask about things like, what are your deepest fears that might stop you from doing this? What are the things that you're most concerned about that you'd never normally tell someone in an interview? So there are things like that that we can probe a little bit. And I'm not saying they're perfect. It's not that they have a perfect consciousness of the end represent. They don't have consciousness, but it's a way for you to dive a little bit into your imagination and sort of expand it, that are really so new. And we don't know how to use these tools right yet. We're learning. But
That's a great reminder of things that are possible today that we haven't really thought about. I'd like to bring us back again to
mhm,
today and where we are and what we can do. And so when we look at how often people are actually using these tools right now, it's not really that well adopted yet. The majority of users have only ever used products like ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, things like that. And then there's a small group of us that have used just a lot of AI functionality, usually within products that they already were using. So like Dovetail, Photoshop, Notion,
Mhm.
Gmail, things like that. What are some AI capabilities that you, as someone who has been exploring so many tools, have found that people might be really surprised are possible today?
I think I alluded to your question just a moment ago in that sort of literally talking to a representative user or talking to a co-innovator. Let me actually just frame this. So in these kind of tools, so you can do this if you know enough Python or other things like that. But in a tool like Yabble or Verve, it makes it easy to say, I want these participants in my conversation, and I want this data set to be considered. So it's like retrieval augmented generation. As a result, you can say, from this study, tell me about your perspective on this brand expert. Tell me about your perspective on this, you know, I don't know. We don't want to just have age represented. One of the reasons I did the 6 minds is to say, think about people from the way they're thinking as a group. So that could be an older person and a younger person thinking the same way or having the same level of expertise and so on. But just to simplify, we could have here's the Gen Z perspective or here's the Eastern America perspective and talking to them. So that's just something I couldn't do in 2022 at all. The notion of agentic AI is one to the terminology isn't great. These are really, I guess, synthetic users. In Verve, you call them agents. When I first heard about synthetic agents and when they first came on the field, the initial reaction from people were like, this is ridiculous. We need real users. This is useless. I want you to just consider what could be the value of these things. Let's go slow, let's be careful, but maybe there could be an opportunity for these things to add value to your process you might not have otherwise had. So if you're a real skeptic, all I ask you to do is genuinely give it a real try, not so you'll be a true believer, but so that you can understand what its capabilities could be in the future or maybe are now and where it could play a role, if any, for you, and maybe not. But I guess I want to take a very tempered approach. And I think the same with RP. I'm delighted that you tried being a participant in an AI moderated study. So there is Listen Labs has a couple demos on their website. I think they do like a personality quiz and one other. And I encourage people just to experience it. So you get the feeling for what that human experiences with that. Going along with the like, that's weird, or oh, it's easier to talk to this thing in this circumstance than it would be to me to talk to a human. I've had people where they're like, yeah, well, I like to shoot my gun in the backyard. It's kind of fun. And, who knows what I'll hit? And they might not want to say that. The person actually was happy to share that with me and then said, do you want to go to my shed in the back and I'll show you all my guns? And I wasn't real keen at that moment, but I think the point is that they might be more willing to say whatever they might say. And so that's an interesting opportunity. So I do want people to try AI moderation. Also, if they know many languages, switch. One of our participants switched into Cantonese and went back, and it just fluently followed along. So it's like, wow, that's possible. And I think the third is this notion of these multi agent systems. These are early days. We really have to do a lot of work to make these things happen right now. There are systems like N8N or Crew AI or others. And I just want you to know that these things exist and you can take a look at what some people have produced. And actually, deep learning AI has great tutorials on these kind of things for humans and people who love to program Python who are fellow humans as well. Another one that I'd love for you to try, again, to understand the possibility of co thinking, is download Cursor, download Lovable, one of these tools. These are all what they call IDEs, and I can't remember what that stands for, but it's basically programming tools. And the key point is you can tell it, I want to build this kind of program, and it goes and does it and asks you questions. My Python is very rusty. I can still do things. And you literally say, copy this part of it and say, what does this mean? And what is it used for? And so it's teaching me and I'm doing stuff with it. And what an interesting model for other situations. So I guess those are just a subset of examples. We could go on, but I'll stop.
Thank you so much for those. Now, I can hear passively in the background people groaning, being, like, oh, it's not going to change research. But what I implore people to do is test these tools, see what they're not good at, and focus your skills in those areas. Because I've tried so many of these, I've tried digital twins, and you quickly see where the technology is today and where it's not. And that enables you to hone your focus, your intention, your path, and it's so valuable. Now, the other point I wanted to kind of close things out with here is I'm someone who's more of a research strategist. I've written so many proposals for products that get killed. They get sliced, they get diced, they get cut down to the smallest chunk possible. Many teams don't want big research studies. And
Mhm.
these tools that you're proposing enable us to get the work done that otherwise would never have been approved before. And that gets us closer to deeper answers rather than further. So, again, I encourage people to explore the possibilities rather than immediately assume that it's not better.
And imagine a stakeholder, for some folks that are like, no, I'll always do research by hand and really meet with people. So today happens to be a Tuesday that we're recording, and they want an answer on Thursday, and they'd like it, with all these situations and with no cost. I just want to say, will they be willing to wait the 7 weeks or the weeks really that it will take to do it by hand? Or will they consider using either an alternative that entirely bypass you, or would they be willing to do something in the middle where you're orchestrating these things to drive efficiency? I understand everyone's desire to have beautiful, elegant, thoughtful, well crafted studies. I do too. I think we can do some of that with these tools supporting us. Just like I don't worry about transcribing anymore. I let Zoom do it or whomever. And so I think there are many pieces like that that we should wonder what we can let go of in order to support us doing the things we're most valuable for.
You brought up earlier the idea of understanding a culture. And I think this is really important
Mhm.
because another factor, again, I'm someone who writes proposals, and sometimes cultures are defined by being quote unquote data centered, right? They will not accept the results of research study until it
Mhm.
has hit such a threshold that to them it's verifiable. And it doesn't matter if you have 10, 20, 30, 40 in depth interviews, some of these leadership would not have accepted it previously. And these tools allow for this. I'm remembering a study where it was pitched to us, which is a major chip company. And they're like, I just need the sample of 100 people, and you give them the number to get 100 people, and it's obscene because to do it by hand
Mhm.
is so effortful, so challenging, it's hard to find the people. But we can actually do this, and this enables researchers to have a seat at the table and have influence that before they didn't, because they were considered the odd cousin who's like, yeah, they have ideas but they can't back it up. And that's a pretty crappy place to be, and now we can overcome that risk.
And no, that's a really interesting perspective. I did my design for how people think book. I really want people to think, obviously, about the end users, but turn that just as much to your senior stakeholders. And I have sympathy for them wanting the several hundred people to be interviewed because often they're at a place where if they get this is a tens hundreds of millions of dollars investment. If they get it right, they're the hero. If they don't, they kind of are out of a job. Like, it's a very tenuous place where you're way at the top and there aren't so many positions for people like you. And so they're actually very vulnerable, and this is a way we can actually really help them have informed design and really support their needs. So we might even have more time to think about how we can design those stories such that it's more impactful on their decision making and really, really understand what they need to make a really good decision, which will help end users, will help your company, will help everyone. It goes back to what drives us in the morning as historically what we called user experience people or psychologists or whomever, is we want the world to be a little better for everyone. So it makes sense.
John, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a wonderful conversation. To close us out, are there any resources that you'd like to recommend to listeners who want to learn more about leveraging brain science and AI in their work?
Mm. Where to start? I'll just selfishly say the things that we've produced that are waiting for you for free. But Brilliant Experience, we have our YouTube channel with all these interviews with the tool makers, and so you can see the tool, you can see where they think things are heading. I think that's actually really interesting. I get you to look at our AI versus human study on our brilliantexperience.com. Follow me or join me. I'd love to hear from your perspective and learn from you. But let me give you a couple people that you may not have expected me to talk about. So one is Chris Nossel. He's at IBM. And these people don't know I'm going to recommend them, by the way, but he's done a lot of stuff on sort of futures thinking and like even just sci-fi and what we can learn from it. This really thinking to a very different world and a very different future experience. These are interesting ways to think, and he's a really thoughtful person in that space. Another person who is younger than me and faster and bright, and I have to watch very carefully. She's probably well past me now. Is a person called Caitlin Sullivan, and she again doesn't know I'm going to recommend her here, but she does really good work in a very similar way to me in learning about AI tools and how they can help all of us in product and design. And so I do not have a corner on all the good knowledge, and I want you to know, here are very different ways to think and other possibilities. So if you want to come back and talk to me, great. But I want you to know about the full breadth because that's the way we can be the best at consulting and have people trust us. So
Yeah, Caitlin, I follow Caitlin as well. She does a lot of interesting little tests and publishing about her experiences, which is great. So aside from the YouTube channel and your website for your studies, do you prefer that people follow you on LinkedIn, or is there some other way that people can best
yeah,
follow along with your thought
I
leadership and
thank
your
you. I
studies?
think yeah, I think that really for now that LinkedIn is a great start, and I feel a little dependent on it, and so like on many of these platforms, we've got to find a way to be Uber platform. But yes, start on LinkedIn, and as I'd say, at least metaphorically, hunt me down there. Right.
Amazing. And also for anyone listening, starting March 10th, John also has his Maven Masterclass all about how to use AI tools for research. So the last round sold out early. So if anyone is interested in that, I highly recommend that they get in touch and sign up for that soon.
Yeah, it's eye-opening. It really is. Once you find these possibilities, you're like, whoa. And so we had such a great sort of whoa moment in our class when we got to that level of synthetic users and other things. So they're not perfect, but it's a different way to think and work.
Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. We provide a pragmatic and practical deep dive into what AI can do and how it's transforming industries. We help designers, researchers, and product managers excel in a rapidly changing future. If you find this strategic content helpful, make sure to follow us in your favorite podcasting app. It also really helps us if you leave reviews. We're on a mission to collect examples of how you're using AI to elevate how you work. Share your examples at designof.ai. This episode was hosted by Arpi Drag-Figueredo, founder and principal strategist of PH1 Research, and Brittany Hobbs, VP Insights at Huge.